So as you come in and join us in the webinar, we would love to know where you're joining us from. So you know, just pop into the chat where you're coming from, and if possible, the traditional territories that you are joining us from. That would be great. All right. So today's purpose, I think we all know what we're here for, but we'll be hearing about Concert's journey from a partner in a City of Vancouver pilot to the full launch of a Community Connectors program across a number of rental buildings. And then we'll also be here to explore each of our potential roles in building community and social connectedness in multi-unit housing contexts. We have a really, really interesting group of participants today, everything from housing operators to property managers, researchers, municipal planners, people working in the health sector, architects and designers, residents of multi-unit housing that are joining us in that capacity. So I think we have a really interesting conversation planned. So just very quickly, I will go over the agenda for today. First, we'll do a bit of an introduction to Hey Neighbour and a little bit of the history of where this project came from. We'll do a quick poll and a little bit of basic housekeeping. At 1:18 or before, if we're really on track, we will start with our three speakers. We will have about 15 minutes of Q&A afterwards, and then we will go out into breakout groups to have a discussion. And I think that'll be really interesting. We've done some work ahead of time to try to kind of create some interesting mixes, so we hope that you will stay with us and be part of that conversation as well. And then around 2:20, 2:25, we'll wrap up those breakout discussions and close for the day. So we will respect everybody's time. We won't go over 2:30. So I just want to do a quick recognition of where this project started. So back in about 2014, some social planners who were working on the City of Vancouver's Healthy City strategy started to look at the emerging research, both locally and globally, around loneliness and social isolation, and the very significant impacts that was having on individual health, both physical and mental, but also collective well-being. And they thought, what can we do as a city within the Healthy City strategy to actually try to address this, to try to build social connections with our residents for all sorts of purposes. And Patty Rios from Happy City is going to go into some of the research a little bit more around why loneliness and social isolation is a problem. I think those of you joining us today don't need to be convinced of that. And in fact, pretty much everyone around the globe now has a much more much clearer sense of why our social connections matter after the pandemic, and why social connections with neighbors matter. Not more than connections with friends and family, but really, really important, because in a pandemic, in a disaster, it's often the people that are right next to you that you're going to need to rely on, and then you're going to be able to help. And knowing them in advance is going to mean that you can help each other a lot more. So fast forward through a few research papers and a few different initiatives, and planners at the City of Vancouver decided to try a pilot that they called Hey Neighbour. It launched in 2018, and the idea was really simple. They found two rental buildings, a Concert Properties building and a Qualix Landmark building, and these landlords were willing to try an experiment whereby a part-time coordinator from the city worked with them to find a few resident animators who would take on essentially a volunteer job to plan and host some social events and initiatives with their neighbors. And the theory was that if they could do this, if they could have a coordinator that was supporting and mentoring residents, that together they could do much more. And of course, in partnership with building managers and property managers and whatnot. It was quite successful. It showed a lot of promise, and there were quite a few of us on the advisory committee for the project. And we had set up a bit of an ad hoc informal community of practice off the side of that committee because a number of us were doing very similar work. And so when the city's project their pilot was wrapping up, it was clear they saw a lot of promise in it, but didn't really feel like the social planners with the healthy city strategy were necessarily the ones to scale it up. And so a few of us on the advisory committee said, well, can we see if we can make something of this? And so over the course of almost a year, we cemented some partnerships and found just enough funding to get rolling, which we did in July 2019. And so the Hey Neighbour pilot became the Hey Neighbour Collective. And the core of the collective is a group of practice partners. We have 6 practice partners at the moment, 3 rental housing operators and 3 nonprofits. And each of our partners are doing some form of intentional community building or resilience work in a multi-unit housing context. Many of them with very broad populations of residents, some specifically with seniors. And each has a slightly different way of going about that work. But our community of practice is an intentional space for people to learn from each other and to exchange what's working, what's not. We then connect those practice partners with a research team. So we have researchers from SFU and from Happy City, and we are looking at a number of different questions. So we're looking at the impact of our partners' programs on resident well-being. And one of the newer areas of interest that we're looking at is to dive into specifically how building community and social connectedness in multi-unit housing can help residents' ability to age and thrive in place. We are looking at the impact of this work on the organizations themselves. So we're trying to see if there's a bit of a business case to be made for investing in the work of community building with residents. We're looking at the role of built form. And then as we learn with our partners, we're also looking at opportunities for systems change. So the final aspect of the collective project is to share what our partners are doing, what they're learning, their models, to mobilize that knowledge and to look at opportunities for systems change so that we can kind of mainstream this work, and also end up with buildings that are friendlier and more organically kind of ready to support people to connect with their neighbors. So today we're going to hear from 2 particular partners, Concert and Happy City. I won't speak much more. I'll quickly thank our sponsors. I won't name each one. And I'm going to flip it over to Monica from Landlord BC and then Marika from BC and PHA to just say a quick welcome. So
Thank
Monica,
you,
why don't
Michelle.
you go first?
Oh, sure. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Monica Sosnowska, and I am the Marketing and Communication Specialist at Landlord BC. For those of you who don't know, Landlord BC is a nonprofit industry association that represents the owners and managers of rental housing here in British Columbia. And we are also an industry partner of the Hey Neighbour Collective. We provide both in-kind and funding, in-kind support and funding as part of our multi-year collaboration. Our CEO, David Hatniak, actually served on the original Hey Neighbour Pilot Advisory Committee, and I have been involved since 2019. Landlord BC takes collaborative approach, and we are keen to find out how social connectivity can make tenants' lives better, and also if it reduces the costs and improves the business results for multi-unit rental housing operators here in British Columbia. And as you know, Hey Neighbour Collective is driving this research. And so we are keen to find out if the model can be replicated and scaled over time.
Thanks so much, Monica. Marika?
Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here today. My name is Marika Albert, and I'm the Policy Director at the BC Nonprofit Housing Association. We represent around 500 nonprofit housing providers across the province, and those providers provide over 60,000 units of nonprofit housing in communities across the province. We are so excited to be a part of the Hey Neighbour Collaborative. Our members are eager to learn how to help facilitate and encourage and support building community connections with their tenants and between their tenants. And I think our involvement in the Hey Neighbour Collaborative will help us take the learnings from this and transmit to them across the province, which we think is it's just such a fantastic project, and I'm really happy to be here.
Thanks so much, Marika. All right, our tech facilitator, Claire, is going to launch a quick poll so that we can get a sense of who's here and kind of with what sort of hat you join us. So if everybody could take a quick moment to fill this out, I'll let apply. So it looks like we have about 80 people on this call, which is great. We're going to have a good breakout group conversations. And we're almost all in. Okay. So we have some for-profit housing operators, some non-profit. We've got quite a mix, lots of community organizations, lots of students and researchers, and a good number of residents. So thank you very much, Claire, and everybody for your responses. Okay, that's great. All right. Let's roll into just a quick little bit of housekeeping. I'll share my screen again. Okay. So if we could just ask everybody to quickly make sure that you are that you're named in a way that Claire can find you when she does breakout groups. So if you could do first name, last name, and if you are here with an affiliation, a work affiliation, if you want to add that after your name, that would be great. I don't think I have to say this to people, but please mute when you're not speaking. So far, so good. I haven't heard any audio disturbance. And any tech questions can go to Claire Patterson. She has all in caps tech in front of her name, so she should be easy to find. And as the presenters are doing their talks, if you can put your questions for them in the chat, my colleague Stacey Barter will collect a few questions from the chat. And if we can answer any other ones, my colleague Luna will be doing their best to do that in the chat as well. And anything else that comes up in the chat, if we can answer it for you afterwards in a group email, we'll do that as well. Okay, so I think, let's see, come on slides, advance. There we go. Okay. I won't read their full bios, but we will now go to our presenters. We'll start with Dave Ramsley, who's the VP of Innovation and Sustainability for Concert Properties. Dave will be followed by Nicole Viduka, who's their Social Sustainability Coordinator, and finally Patty Rios, who is the Research Lead for Happy City. So Dave, I'm going to turn it over to you.
I guess I better turn my mute off then if I'm going to present.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
I find it helps. I think that people are easy. It's easier to understand you, hear what I'm saying. Yeah, it's first of all, it's a great pleasure to be here today, and great introduction, Michelle. So, Concert Properties is a proud member of the Hey Neighbour Collaborative, and I think, and we were also one of the original participants in the the Hey Neighbour pilot. Just to give you an overview, I guess, and context as to why Concert got involved in this and some of our history with it, you could even start back with our founding in 1989. So Concert Properties is kind of a unique developer in that we were founded over 31 years ago by 19 union pension funds, and with the idea of creating affordable, assured rental housing and using only union-based trades to build that housing. So thereby, ensuring that there was good quality jobs for hardworking Canadians that paid a fair and living wage, and that we were also providing good homes that were affordable and close to the services and jobs that they held. So, Concert's got a long history when it comes to social sustainability, and I think has also, through its history, viewed itself much more than just a developer, but like many other developers, we view ourselves as a community builder. And many of our developments are master plan developments, which are a collection of buildings with knitted together with what we hope is going to be a high quality public realm. When I joined Concert in 2018, my first job was to really kind of rethink and refresh our approach to sustainability. And given our unique position of who we are, we wanted this to not only be an environmental sustainability framework, but also include, the other two legs of the stool, which were social and economic. And it was really coming out of the Hey Neighbour pilot that a lot of our foundational work and insights on how we were going to approach social sustainability came to bear. So, while we viewed ourselves as community builders, there was also the research that was coming out at that time to show that, a lot of the inhabitants of multifamily dwellings, lack the social connection or, cross-functional social capital to, to meet their neighbors or to, build community within these residents. And so while we thought we were doing all the right stuff on the bricks and mortar side, we noticed that there could be something missing in between. So the Hey Neighbour project and pilot was really useful for us to shed some light on that. And so when we were developing our sustainability framework, we really integrated this idea of how do we actually address social isolation and loneliness and be part of the solution in that regard as well too. So working through that, we with the help of Happy City and others, we developed our community, our Connecting Our Communities program, which is based, in large part just on the learnings and findings and processes developed actually through the Hey Neighbour pilot. But in terms of building the value and making the case for it, we really tried to focus as much as possible on, how do we make this a legacy program that is also, a longitudinal study as much as possible in, how can a developer create more community in the buildings that they're building. So, we worked with other members of the Hey Neighbour Collective here to, really develop a comprehensive research program as well too, to start with, some baseline metrics, institute our program, and then make sure that we're testing, at least once a year through surveys to see how we're doing. And that's throughout the entire 8,000 units of rental housing that we hold nationally. So, our hope is that not only is this a contribution to the community of practice that's developing around social sustainability, social inclusion, equity, how can we build better, more equitable housing, but that this will be, we're trying to share as much as possible and be as open as possible in terms of our learnings doing this. So you'll hear more of that from Nicole today. But where we are today is we've launched the program in all of our British Columbia buildings. And we're looking to expand to our Ontario properties as soon as possible. But yeah, really happy to be here and look forward to this discussion groups at the end of this.
Thanks very much, Dave. And Nicole, do you want to load up your slides? I'll turn it over to you.
Sounds great. Can you see my slide? All good? Okay, wonderful. So yeah, thank you everyone for coming out. As Dave said, it's great to have the opportunity to share our Connecting Our Community program and showcase what we've been doing. Going to give you just a brief orientation to our program and how we're connecting our community. We'll touch on some learnings during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'll leave you with a question. How can we keep residents engaged in the not so easy task of building social connection during a global pandemic? I invite you to share your thoughts as they come up in the chat, and we'll circle back to this question. So I briefly want to touch on why we need this program. As Dave mentioned, our aim is to address the prevalence of loneliness and social isolation in our communities, but it also comes back to concert's culture. Really delighted to be part of this valuable work and shaping concert's story as a community builder that really believes in the value of investing in residents' health and well-being. So how does connecting our community work? This is a program for the residents, by the residents. Community connectors, they're volunteers who work together to create activities for their neighbors based on their community's unique needs. We've asked for a 6-month commitment to the role, and we offer a monthly honorarium to thank our volunteers for their time. So this is our approach, outlining the relationships between the various teams involved in the program. Our volunteers, or community connectors as we're calling them, work together alongside myself, building managers, and our site staff to plan and execute monthly activities for residents. The Hey Neighbour Collective has really brought our community connectors into the fold by working with us to provide them tools and trainings. And some of our volunteers are working directly with Happy City to evaluate the impact of their interventions. And again, as Dave mentioned, we're tracking our progress across all of our communities through our biannual social well-being survey. So some of the metrics we're tracking include things like how many neighbors do residents consider friends, how many neighbors can they call on when they're in need, and how often they feel lonely. Patty will be diving further into this research in the following presentation and how we'll be using it to further shape our program. So how are we connecting our community? Here's an example of some of the resources we put together, including Concert's guidebook for community connectors. It's a toolkit that's available to residents as a reference to leading their community initiatives. And in December, we launched our resident recruitment campaign. We hosted a roadshow of introductory days at all of our residential sites, engaged with residents one-on-one, invited them to stop by the greeting booth in the lobby, and invited them to share their ideas on what they would like to see happen in their community. We followed this with a virtual kickoff for residents that are more comfortable engaging online. And in partnership with the Hey Neighbour Collective, we hosted a workshop for community connectors where we dove more into the how-to, provided tools around making it safe during COVID-19, and an idea jam to spark inspiration. Then we connected groups of volunteers at each of our properties to begin working together. Just this spring, our community connectors launched. We currently have 18 volunteers across 11 rental buildings in BC. And each community has been taking a different approach. Some are surveying their neighbors for insights to create activities based on their community-specific interests. Others are hosting online speed friending events, seedling giveaways, contests. It's been really inspiring to connect with residents. We have a really creative group. I think what's most inspiring is that they're learning about their neighbors. You know, they're reaching out not only to connect, but also to tap into the talents and skills that exist within their own communities. So this photo is one of our volunteer workshops. We're building a community of practice, providing forum for peer learning and support on a quarterly basis, and we're celebrating their accomplishments. So what are some of our learnings so far? Well, we're learning that imposed safety restrictions can lead to creative adaptations. With the closure of building amenities, we've had to think outside the box, pivoting to online events, FARA parties, corridor gatherings, utilizing common areas like elevators, lobbies, green space. Those are some of the ways we're encouraging our residents to connect. We're also finding that passive activities like installations in the lobby for passersby to partake in allow residents to engage organically within the boundaries of their own comfort zones while still facilitating a sense of community. And what role will technology play moving forward? We have yet to fully uncover this as we explore some different approaches. We have moved some of our activities online and are looking to explore how prop tech or a tenant engagement platform might fit into this mix. It will be interesting to see how digital platforms might either facilitate or hinder community building. Of course, remaining inclusive to those who might not want to engage with technology or who might not feel familiar will be very important to hold as a consideration. And we're also encouraging our volunteers to really think about social equity when planning their activities, including supporting cultural, diversity, language diversity, and supporting the local economy. So back to the question, I invite you to share your ideas in the chat on ways we can build and maintain engagement. It'd be great to get your insights as we continue to explore ways to keep our volunteers and residents, engaged in this work. And we have some fun things in the works, including an upcoming mural project, our Westridge property in East Vancouver. We're currently exploring artists and how we can involve residents in the process of placemaking through a collaborative art project. And as Dave mentioned, we're making plans to adapt and scale our program across our Ontario residential portfolio in the coming year. So please look out for that. Thanks. And if you have any questions or would like to connect after this session, I would love to continue the conversation. So please get in touch.
Thank you so much, Nicole. That was great. And my goodness, our presenters are being so good with their time limits. I think you've both been quite under, which is great. We'll have lots of time for good questions. So Patty, let's turn this over to you now.
Hi, thank you, Michelle. My name is Patty Rios, and I'm housing and research lead at Happy City. And I don't have enough words to say what a pleasure it has been working with Concert in this wonderful initiative. As many of you might know, but also to give you a little bit of background about Happy City, our team focuses on finding the intersections between well-being and the design of the city. And when we knew that Concert was going to be implementing this program and that there was an opportunity to actually amplifying their efforts and see how not just the design of the city, but programming can impact in our well-being, in the way that we are connected with others, we wanted to be part of this. And for a few years now, we have been looking into opportunities to promote social well-being and social connectedness through the design of programming in multi-unit houses. And so just to tell you a little bit about this background, and Michelle started mentioning about this, the Connections and Engagement report that the Vancouver Foundation published in 2012 was an eye-opener to a lot of organizations. And we actually started exploring ways from our discipline to promote social well-being and social connectedness. The results from this study show that half of Vancouver's population found it very difficult to make friends, that people that lived in Vancouver less than 5 years were finding it more difficult even. And it was also a very tough thing to do for younger people and for people over 65. It also showed that 1 in 4 people found themselves alone more than they would like to. And then the 2017 report came, and you would imagine that a lot of things might have changed in 5 years. However, the report was showing that there was little improvement, but people were still finding it difficult to make friends and meaningful connections. And surprisingly, people were less active in community life than 5 years ago. So it was kind of like a moment to reflect and see what else can we do, because there are all of these efforts around the city about bringing people together, using public spaces, the neighborhood grants, but can we actually do this to promote it through our policies and also through the design of the built environment? So when we realize that when we start connecting these statistics and connecting this to evidence about social well-being, and realize that connected people can live up to 15 years longer, are more likely to overcome cancer and less likely to have heart attacks, it becomes a no-brainer to be putting our efforts into promoting social connectedness. So we became more and more aware of the need of purposefully designing and activating spaces that promote sociability and nurture social connectedness. That's when we started working on the Happy Homes project 4 years ago. It started as a literature review to uncover all the ways that design, programming, and policy could promote social connections. And it evolved into an accessible toolkit with pragmatic actions that can be implemented by architects, by developers, building managers, and also planners. And it was about this time when the Hey Neighbour pilot was happening, and when we started having conversations with Dave and helping them also with the final parts of the sustainability framework, when we started talking about this idea, and we thought it would be something that it would inspire other developers, managers, and we wanted to help record the positive effects of this initiative to amplify the efforts and inspire other members of the community. And all of this has been possible to Concert support and also to CMHC support through the Demonstrations Initiative program. So what is our role, the Happy City role as researchers in this project? Our role is to track and evaluate residents' well-being and to assess how this series of programming activities have a positive impact on the number of neighbors people consider their friends, how they help or how they can help to become more active in the community, allow people to feel more welcome, or even feel that they have a social network that they can rely on in case of an emergency. So we're carrying out this granular study in the 5 buildings of Collingwood Village, hoping that this approach can be scaled to all of the buildings, but also implemented by other building managers in the industry so that they can track their own efforts if they decide to start activating spaces. So we designed a study.
Patty,
yep.
I just have a quick question. I know you
Sure.
had slides. Is this pre-slides, or are you thinking you're sharing slides with us?
I'm doing pre-slides.
Oh, good. Okay, good. I saw your eyes drift every once in a while, and I thought, uh-oh, I hope we're not supposed to be seeing slides. Okay, sorry to interrupt you.
Thank you. So we designed to actually design a study to evaluate well-being. And now it's when I'm going to start sharing my slides. Here we go. Okay, so everyone, can I have a thumbs up, Michelle, if you're seeing my sense of belonging? Perfect. Okay. So the first thing that we understood about this study is that we needed to determine what social well-being meant. So what we did was understand what social well-being means and what are the different variables. So we decided that we would be measuring sense of belonging, resilience, perceived health, social connectedness, inclusion, level of engagement, sense of safety, and tenure. These were the ways that we were going to be tracking residents' well-being. Oops. Okay. And in order to build the starting survey, the baseline that Dave was talking about, so that we could recognize how people are doing right now, we started reviewing existing Canadian surveys like Vital Signs 2019, Toronto Social Capital Study, My Health, My Community. Some of you might be very familiar with these ones, to identify the questions that could be targeting these variables. And then for all the variables that we didn't find any questions, then we went back to our research to find questions from environmental psychology that could help us understand how people were doing in terms of well-being. So the first thing was to design a survey that would be applied to all of the different residents in Collingwood Village. And this is a very, very small kind of like summarized chart of how we are addressing the research piece. So we are conducting a survey before starting all of these programming activities. We will be conducting a survey 1 year after starting these programming activities. And this survey is actually embedded in the satisfaction survey that Concert conducts annually so that they can keep track of these efforts. And the idea is that the survey is repeated yearly, as I was mentioning, so that we can keep track of how people's well-being is improving. And at the same time, there are different activities happening. So these figures, the pentagons here, represent the different programming activities that are going to be happening throughout the Community Connectors program. And we're going to also be evaluating those, but with a more qualitative approach to this. So we're going to be talking with people, we're going to be observing in hopefully what will be in-person events soon, how they communicate with each other, how the built environment is actually helping them establish the relationships or not, if light, if having seating opportunities, if vegetation, if ventilation, the size of the space might be also impacting, so that we can learn what are the types of activities that are supporting people on its different demographics, but also what are the types of low-hanging fruit retrofits that building could be doing to support social connectedness. So for instance, one of the things that we have been finding from the first survey with Concert is that they were doing great in terms of sense of safety and sense of belonging. We consider like a medium rated variable in terms of perceived health, spatial inclusion, and tenure. But the variables that we needed to work more or note flag to Concert that needed to be worked on more, a little bit more, was engagement, social connectedness, and resilience. So, and it's worth mentioning that this happened pre-COVID. So people were still kind of like having their normal lives. And with these results, one of the things that we also kind of like carried on a statistical analysis, and I won't get into the details of that one, but some of the most promising things that we found is that having 2 or 3 friends in a building make a huge difference. People that reported having 2 or 3 friends were reporting a greater sense of belonging, feeling prepared in case of an emergency, and they are feeling more welcome. And then also speaking with people on a daily basis. People who speak with neighbors on a daily basis, they feel that they can ask someone for help in case of an emergency or if the situation arises. And on the other hand, people who don't speak frequently with neighbors, they feel less resilient in case of an emergency, and they feel also more lonely. And one of the other things that we discovered is that people who often participate in activities, they want to get to know more their neighbors, they report a better perception of their own health, and they feel less lonely. So when you start kind of like identifying these key elements, key leverage points that you can focus on in the different activities that you're going to be promoted, you have kind of like an insight to knowing what is going to boost people's well-being. And based on the results from this early study, what we did was created some recommendations. Like we know that people wanted to have been involved in activities that are greater than themselves, so that they could create over time meaningful relationships. So we suggested things like gardening or being part of artistic activities. And then there's also opportunities for casual encounters that could allow people to talk on a frequent basis. So maybe meeting points for activity clubs or creating a bike dog wash station where people with different interests can meet. And also make it easy to participate in activities. And one of the things that has been it's a silver lining from COVID is that the digital world has been making people very easy to participate in this first activity that the community connectors conducted that was called speed neighboring. So this program is starting and the first activity has happened, and it already shows results of how people are feeling more connected after the activity, that they feel that they are more likely to reach out to neighbors after the activity, and that they just feel a little bit more like they belong in this place, in the building. And I was talking about all of this study started when it was pre-COVID, but then Nicole has been doing an amazing job just shifting in how we can keep this alive while COVID is happening and we need to physically distance. So the collective felt that, the Hey Neighbour Collective felt that we needed to respond in the same way. So together we created the Together Apart toolkit with ideas for staying connected in times of physical distancing. So these are ideas that can be taken from anyone that is wanting to activate the building, depending on, of course, on the demographics and the type of support that they might need in this moment. So just kind of like wrapping up, we have conducted the survey, the baseline survey, and we have started measuring and evaluating how some of these events are going. We are early in the process. We will continue to do this throughout the summer and the fall. And then hoping that the second survey is going to start showing how these well-being shifts happen, and hopefully the variables that are showing low are going to be improving, and the ones that were showing high results, they're going to keep in that way. So I think that's it from my side, Michelle.
Okay, thank you so much, Patty. That's really wonderful. I know that you each really kind of constrain yourself to the time, and I know there's so much more each of you can say. So I do have my colleague Stacy Barter tapped to start asking some questions from the chat. Stacy, are you ready with one?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks so much, Dave and Nicole and Patty. Great presentations, and it's just so exciting to see this all developing, and it's been great to be involved in the periphery. There are some questions in the chat, and I also know that Monica and from Landlord BC and Marika from BC Nonprofit Housing Association had some questions as well. But maybe I'll just start with some of the ones that were popping up in the chat that are specifically related to some of what you were sharing. Nicole, there were a couple of kind of more nitty-gritty questions, the nuts and bolts of how you're running this. So one question was the role of building managers in identifying potential community connectors. So maybe you could start with that. And then I wouldn't mind if you expanded on that, any of you, on the role of building managers more generally in this initiative and what you're finding around that, and how important is that, and how are they being engaged?
Sure. Well, I would say, our building managers are such an important piece of this ecosystem. They're on the ground. They have relationships that they've been building with residents, you know, they're interacting with them one-on-one. So while I'm there to provide a lot of supports and have that regular check-in with our volunteers, it's really our building site staff that are facilitating that relationship and really the face of this program. So, you know, supporting them throughout the process as well is, I'd say, maybe one of the challenges. Finding a balance where we can all work together and co-facilitate these activities and relationships. But I would say that their main function is really to be the face of the program, and they're really bought in as well. You know, they really see the value in this community building work.
And I'm going to probe a little bit around that, because I know in my related work within multi-unit housing, to be quite honest, we found sometimes that building managers or property managers can be the gatekeepers, that we've got teams of residents who are so keen to build more community in their buildings. And sometimes it's actually property management that can kind of shut that down or try to sort of control the environment. So I'm curious, is that just part of Concert's culture, or what's facilitated that buy-in that you're seeing there?
What's facilitated it? I mean, as I said, there are.
You've put yourself accidentally on mute, Nicole.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, I would say, you know, as I said, they're on the ground and they have some long-standing relationships with our residents. You know, a lot of our building managers have been in their role for quite a number of years. So, you know, they really have facilitated this in the way that they've helped us kind of pick out those residents that are really keen. You know, they've brought them in. Yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Can I jump in too?
Yeah,
I would also just say, like, I think running the pilot was really helpful in this, right? Because I think it allowed us to do this in a manageable way across, like, you know, one of our 11 buildings. And I think, you know, and also having the buy-in of like our leadership within property management. So, you know, before Carrie Jackson, our current SVP for rentals, came in, we had, you know, Bev, who was, you know, an early kind of champion of this program. So I think that, you know, having it come from the top, and then having, you know, one of our senior property managers, you know, Penny, who was who really, I think actually kind of got religion on this through the Collingwood pilot that we did. And then I think that really kind of helped set the tone a lot of the time when, you know, it came out through sort of the hierarchy, right? And let them know that this was, you know, important corporately for us. And then, you know, finally, I would say it is part of the kind of the Concert culture on this, you know, or our new tagline is building a people first future, right? So I think that actually a lot of our property management people, the site staff, are really excited, and actually a lot of them love to do this kind of stuff. Like, you know, super engaged. I'm totally blanking on her name right now at the Westridge, Nicole. Romina, she's wonderful, and, like, you know, got kind of into this work because she's like an extrovert and loves meeting people. And I think that the community connectors have been a welcome addition, because, you know, they're there to kind of do the sort of the grunt work and the leg work, and to kind of like set up these things where, and property management staff, you know, at the sites can just be there to sort of hopefully help lift it up, give it profile, and, you know, and attend and actually get to meet, you know, because it makes their job easier too when they have better relationships with the residents as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks to both of you for that. And I can see how for a lot of people, it might give more meaning to their work to be engaged in these aspects, for sure. Great. Okay. Well, lots of questions coming up in the chat. So one question is whether you looked specifically at strata condo buildings or only in purpose-built rental. And any thoughts around that?
Yeah, we don't manage our stratas, so you know, and so we don't really have the license to operate there. You know, it's one thing we are interested in looking at, where we have, as I said, you know, we're a master plan community builder. So typically, many of our master plans will have components of both rental housing and for sale condo. So the thought is that once we get the projects up and running in some of the rental buildings, that those can serve as sort of anchors or beachheads in terms of, pushing these programs out into other buildings. That could happen at Collingwood Village. That could happen at, in a couple of our projects in Ontario. The other kind of synergy we see as well too is we operate seniors housing as well too, and we think there's a real opportunity there where there's actually some great first-class amenities in those buildings that could actually serve as potentially hosts for other community events if we can take it outside the building level.
That's great. There was a question about seniors in particular and the demographics of the Collingwood Village buildings in particular. Someone had a question about whether you know how many seniors there are. So I think there's that specific question about, do you know, I have a sense of the demographics, and I'm going to imagine that implicit in that there might be some curiosity around multi-generational opportunities, and what are you seeing around that? Maybe Nicole or Patty, I know you've also been tagging along for lots of these activities.
Nicole, I mean, we have community connectors that run the gamut of all demographics, right?
Definitely, from 11 years of age to over 60, for sure. We don't have data on the demographics specifically of our buildings. As a housing provider, it's a bit sensitive to maybe ask that question in our surveys, but we are intentionally working with our community connectors to engage multi-generationally. Like, that is at the ethos of what we're doing.
Great. Wonderful.
Just to jump quickly on that one, one of the things that, while that data is not collected, one of the things that has been an opportunity when people after the event are interested in a follow-up conversation, chatting for an interview, that's where we can actually hone on what is working for the different age groups, for the different demographics, for the different cultural backgrounds. And it's not a statistical analysis, but it's a representation of the different voices. So those things we can be capturing to see what is working for seniors, what is working for women with single moms, for instance, what might be working with immigrants that have just arrived to the country as well. So I think that within that spectrum, we're going to be finding very interesting things of the spectrum of activities that can be pursued. And then where do you want to prioritize efforts? Who is feeling more lonely?
That's great. And Patty, there was a question, particularly just building on some of what you're sharing around the indicators or measures that you're using for social connectedness in this survey.
Sure. So for social connectedness, we're using how often do you talk with neighbors, the frequency of your conversations, how many neighbors do you consider as friends, and willingness to connect with neighbors and get to know them better. So each variable is usually made of 3 different indicators, or each indicator is made up of 3 different questions.
So there were a few questions more generally about what you're seeing as sort of the highlights so far, and then also what some of the challenges are, and particularly a question from Claire around what you're seeing around the biggest barriers to residents connecting, and the barriers particularly between different age groups or cultural groups. So I know you're in early stages of really scaling this to multiple buildings at once, but any kind of early inklings around what's working well and some of those challenges?
For sure. I would point to technology, most definitely. Having to pivot online, we're not getting together the way that we used to, right? We would have launched much differently with in-person events, and now having to take that digital approach has been a challenge. And the challenge there is remaining inclusive, right? There's people that just don't wish to engage that way, or might not, be familiar. So that's one of the biggest challenges, I would say. But we are having those conversations in the early stages of the program. One of our residents that reached out is a person with a disability. So we're continuing that conversation around, how can we ensure that even the email notifications that we're sending out are accessible, using grassroots, analog methods to connect with residents, right? Through posters as well as digital. So making sure we're hitting all the touch points as best we can, I'd say right now is the biggest challenge. And we still, fleshing out how we're going to move forward with technology will be something to see.
Yeah, and the pandemic has pushed all of us around that, hasn't it? Yeah.
And just building on the technology piece, the silver lining is that in this event, actually, one of the comments that were coming from participants was it was actually easy, and they are not expected to be in an event for 1.5 hours. They have kind of like an easy in and easy out. That's one of the things that we have been studying within our research, like the level to control your social exposure. So it might be that it works on our side, that by introducing yourself to others through technology might create kind of like a more safe sphere, especially for those who are introverts. And then who knows, like that's kind of like the first step, but then you move into the physical world.
Yeah. Great. And anything else you want to share around like highlights so far? What's really inspiring?
Yeah, I would just say the enthusiasm of our volunteers. It's been really inspiring. They really, I think, see the value in the work we're doing, the value in building social connection, especially during this isolating time. I'm sure that contributes, but, we didn't really know how this would land or be received, given the health guidelines, the restraints. So the highlight has just been how self-organized and motivated and keen they've been. It's been great. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've gotten to tag along virtually with some of that, and I would agree. It's really inspiring and kind of energizing, actually, just to see everything that's happening. So lots of questions in the chat. So just sort of switching gears a little bit, there's a really interesting question that I think is, underpins a lot of the bigger picture conversation around social connectedness. And the question is, how important is it achieving affordable and stable housing? What's the role of affordable, stable housing in fostering these important social networks? And where does that sort of fit in how Concert is approaching this whole initiative overall?
I can jump in and start there. So I guess our 8,000 unit study will be interesting on this one, because when you look at actually the majority of the units that we operate and manage here in British Columbia, the majority of them are somewhere on the affordable spectrum. So many of them were built on land leases with the City of Vancouver, and then therefore have to be offered at below market rates. So in some cases, 30% below market. And they all are assured rental housing as well too. So they can never be anything else but rental housing. So more than half of the units that we're going to be surveying on a regular basis will kind of fit into that category of assured affordable. And then our other rental units will be assured rental housing, but they'll be market rates. So we own another building here in Vancouver that is market, and then all of our Ontario portfolio will be market rates as well. So I'm hoping that when we do this longitudinal research, maybe there'll be some insights there, or I don't know what we're going to find yet, but we are also putting into our surveys, for the first time, we're asking questions about, what's the percentage of your annual income that you're spending on housing, right? And trying to see if there's any correlations there in terms of, people's willingness or ability to socialize, right? Maybe they don't have the free time. So, yeah, it's something we don't have any answers to yet, but we're hoping to learn more as time goes on.
Yeah, that's great. I think it really is an important thing for us all to be learning about, lots of curiosity around those links, for sure.
And one of the things that we have been finding through evidence is that aging in place is one of the determinants of social well-being. So the more time you get to spend in a community, the more time you have to actually grow roots and to get to know each other from those casual conversations into meaningful relationships, the more happy, the more connected you're going to feel over time, and the more resilient you're going to be. And one of the things that we found in the baseline survey was that people who, I'm looking here at my data, but the ones that have been living in between 4 and 10 years, they are the ones that are more likely to speak with neighbors. And there's something funny happening. People in between their 2nd and 4th year, they are less likely to get engaged and speak with neighbors. But the first year, when they first move to the building, and then after year 4, when they have consolidated some probably relationships and friends, that's when they are more active. So it would be very interesting to know what happens in between year 2 and 4. Like, do you get you get very busy with everyday things, and the emotion, the excitement of moving into the new building has passed. But then how can you keep involving them so that they still are connected and building those meaningful relationships, and hopefully they can stay there for a longer amount of time, enabling them to age in place.
So interesting. And this is related to a question in the chat around generally if you're tracking how long the volunteers, so the community connectors, have lived in the buildings. Yeah, so some questions around that. Are you noticing any trends or any data on that so far?
It's something that we do ask in our application form when residents do submit their interest to join. And it's been a mix. We have quite a few newcomers, I would have to say, that have been at the building for a year or less, and newcomers to Canada and Vancouver as well as a few that have been longstanding residents. So, different reasons for, I think, wanting to step up and take part in this. And it'll be interesting to, get some of this research that Patty's speaking about and see how we can inform our programming moving forward based on that. Yeah.
So the initial Hey Neighbour pilot that Concert participated in was sort of incubated within the City of Vancouver. And Molly's got a great question about what the role of municipalities is in this particular initiative as you're moving forward, but also more generally, what do you as a company see as the role of municipalities in promoting this type of approach?
At this point, it's unclear. I mean, I think, one of the things we're finding is that, I'm going to speak out of both sides of my mouth now because we're a developer as well too. But those amenity requirements really do help in terms of creating the space for social interaction to happen too, right? I think many of the buildings that were built that we're in were built in like the 1990s and early 2000s, and before there was any sort of real requirements to provide amenity space for people. So in many cases we just don't have those kind of like those internal spaces where maybe larger groups of people can gather. And so I think having those requirements in place, which many municipalities do now, is really helpful. But other than that, I don't know that this is, or maybe even just being similar to sort of the Hey Neighbour Collaborative, just helping to support groups like this that can be, a convener and a knowledge sharer and builder of kind of these practices up, right? And helping landlords kind of access these types of resources. They do have a, I guess, a role and access to, housing providers everywhere.
Yeah. Anything you want to add, Patty, from your lens? I know particularly you're tracking aspects related to the built form that Dave has spoken about, but their perspective.
I think that Dave is touching on a very important aspect. I think that the more we know about how amenities work and how these shared spaces can actually promote social connectedness, the more informed recommendations or asks planners can have in the different municipalities. So one of the things that we have been finding is that when they are really tucked in and they have little light and they have no connection whatsoever with an outdoor space, and it's not part of the flow of the daily of the daily pathway or journey that a resident is gonna take, they are more or less likely to be visited. So understanding what a successful amenity space or a shared room looks like can be informing those design guidelines that each municipality has. And moreover, there are a lot of opportunities that they don't have. The design where we socialize, the space where we socialize, it doesn't have to be just the amenity room or the shared space. There are opportunities to run to each other in the landing of the elevator or the stairwell. We can be running into each other in the hallways, in the corridors. And sometimes these spaces feel like very institutionalized in some buildings and that they are just for the circulation purposes, but they could actually be activating all kinds of passive activities like Nicole was mentioning. Like, what if you have a board where you can place the pictures of where you went to your last vacation, or maybe share the artwork that your kid did that you're very proud of. So that helps to have an insight into people's lives, but also to start finding ways in which you can connect to talk with neighbors, find the excuse. And going back to what municipalities could be doing is, we need to understand that providing programming opportunities and activating space can be actually a way to be addressing the amenity contributions. So these are developers, managers that are going the extra mile. So are there any kind of FSR exemptions that could be promoted when widening, for instance, corridors, or having an extra amenity room? Or in terms of contributing to the community, if opening the lobby space for community events, this could be also considered a benefit, not just for the neighbors, but for the actual community. So I think that understanding how we can maximize the possibility of social connectedness could be a very good way for municipalities to start promoting more these initiatives.
Yeah, and I mean, as you're speaking, just seeing the intersection of, you know, the power of having the great physical space combined with this programmatic element, and the potential of those two pieces working together is really powerful. Great. Well, thank you all so much. We didn't get to everyone's questions in the chat. And Nicole, there were a number of more specific questions about the recruitment and the orientation of volunteers. So maybe if you have a chance when you're not busy to type in some thoughts in the chat, that would be great. And I'll turn it back over to Michelle to lead us off into some breakout discussions. And I know the conversation can continue on some of these themes. So thanks so much.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm really glad that you kept your presentation so short so that we could take so many questions. That was really wonderful. Okay, so our tech facilitator, Claire, has been working away in the background, kind of shuffling us all into different breakout groups. So for the next 20 minutes, we will all go into groups, have a quick conversation. We've got some prompting questions. Each room will have a facilitator and a note taker. And yeah, I think, Claire, if you could put these questions into the chat and then also broadcast it to each of the breakout groups, that would be great. And yeah, very much looking forward to this part. There's been some really great contributions in the chat. So just as a quick side too, we will go through the chat and some of the questions. If we can answer any of those questions in like a group email afterwards, we will do so, and we'll share some of the resources also. Sounds like it worked brilliantly. And we got to hear a bit of a theme from your session, which sounds like resources, which is a big one that comes up, right? How do we resource this work? You know, how much does it cost to have a program like this? Do you need a coordinator? Could just residents do it? Could it be just volunteers? Like, these are, I don't know exactly where your conversation started, but this issue of resources and roles and jobs and you know, paid coordinators versus resident volunteers comes up a lot. So thank you, everybody, for sticking with us for the breakout groups and for being patient with definitely some technical difficulties there. So I hope not too many people were like just left in the ether. But we'll wrap up really quickly here. I did want to maybe just call on a few facilitators to share a few themes that came out. So Claire Graham, why don't I ask you just out of the blue to share a few nuggets from your chat?
Sure, it was a great conversation, and with people coming from different parts of the puzzle. And one of the key themes that came out was that it's an ecosystem that we need to build to support the work. It's not just specific relationships. So if you just focus on the building manager, they need to be supported by the management, by the mission, but also that it's connecting to all of the other community resources and amenities. It's kind of a linking to parks, linking to other community services, and that is that connector role. I think the name is good in concert is a good name to help build that ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. How about Paula Carr? Any nuggets from your group? we have Paula on the line
Yes.
still?
Yeah,
Yeah,
right
great,
here. Yeah, thank you. Yes, we had an incredibly dynamic group and
good.
really appreciated the conversation. And sorry we didn't say goodbye. We got kind of cut off.
That
But a
always
couple of
happens.
things. A couple of things I think that really struck us was just number one, how the model and demonstration that Concert is doing is really something we're spreading, particularly in the for-profit sector, private sector, and kind of thinking about how to engage other folks around this. Was talking about really spreading a little bit more knowledge around the economic analysis. Sort of are there some economic benefits, and does this keep people in their spaces and communities longer term? There was also some talk about, as we talk about our impacts, so we often talk about environmental impacts, but beginning to start to highlight in reports and whatever social impacts would be great. And, just more support, not to underestimate the role of technology and social connection, and making sure maybe all buildings have broadband and that connection in all of their apartments would be great. And as far as other sectors, really focusing around that ecosystem of the neighborhood and really looking at kind of some in and outs, which I think people talked about as overall community building. So
Thanks,
great
Paula.
ideas.
Okay, just because we're short on time, I'll call on Luna.
Hi. My group also had a very dynamic conversation, and I'll quickly go through that. A couple of things we talked about are sort of the importance in policy support with programming, and especially in terms of funding and ways whereby when considering cost for the developer, there could be incentives that allows for them to put more support into group programming in buildings. We also talked about the importance of tenure and the importance of people feeling safe where they are, that they can stay where they are, will make the case for people to invest into neighborly relationships. So a very important aspect about relationships too is that currently we don't really have a very active environment whereby people are relating to each other in safe and healthy ways. We're seeing a lot more conflicts. So a thing about relationships too is to take note of that when doing this work. I also kind of drew on something that was very interesting in the Cohere model, where Rebecca talked about the first floor being a community space that's just empty. And reminded me of growing up in Singapore, where in public housing, the first floor usually are kept empty. It's called void deck, and has been used in many ways by different folks from different cultural communities to hold weddings, to hold funerals, and often within blocks of each other. And it was so surprising for me to come and settle here in 2001 to see that that is not something that we practice here. So really thinking about, not just amenity space. I think one of our members talked about amenity space for amenity space sake, but really thinking about what can even just an empty floor do. So those were some of the things that came up for my group.
Thank you very much. I wish we had time to call on everybody because I know each group has interesting things to share. But hopefully you will all join us again at whatever next chat we have. And I just want to thank our sponsors again. Landlord BC, BCNPHA, Vancouver Coastal Health, United Way Lower Mainland, Metro Vancouver, and the Catherine Donnelly Foundation. Thank you everybody for coming. Claire, I hope that you've put the evaluation link in the chat box. There it is. Stacy got it in there. I think Claire did too. So if you have a second, click on that link. Let us know what you thought of the session. It'll help us improve the next one. We will also follow up with an email with the same link. Again, thank you so much, everybody. I think we probably could have gone on for another hour, but much appreciated. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks, Stacy. Great job today.
Bye, Dave.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done. Well done. That was great.
Thank you.
Excellent. Bye, everybody.
Bye.